Genius is a word that's thrown around in the Naruto universe a lot. A born genius, a genius of the Byakugan, a genius of hard work, a genius of scientific ninja tools. In fact, the word is thrown around so often that it feels as though it kind of begins to lose its meaning. If everyone's a genius, is anybody? However, while many characters in Naruto are talked about as being geniuses, only 10 characters in all of Naruto are ever specifically referred to as such. And honestly, when you look at the list of those 10 characters, them being the only 10 ever referred to as geniuses, well, it actually makes a fair amount of sense. Because, well, yes, we can sit here and say that Rock Lee is a genius of hard work, or that Naruto was a genius, he just didn't realize it until much later in his life. There is definitely a pretty small list of characters that existed at certain times throughout Naruto's story at a cut above everybody else. And today, I want to talk about those geniuses, and give a once and for all definitive ranking on who amongst them was truly the greatest. See, because while genius can mean a whole lot of different things in the Naruto universe, today I want to pin down exactly what we were trying to use that word to encapsulate. And once we pin that down, I want to figure out who amongst this small group of ninja was truly the one genius to rule them all. All that is to say, today we're ranking and explaining the top 10 greatest geniuses in all of Naruto. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video every single week, you guys can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are on the second episode of Rock Lee vs. Gaara, so it's time to open some gates. So, before we dive into this video, I want to lay down a couple of ground rules to help you understand the metrics we're going to be using to measure just how great these geniuses are. See, because I'm not going to be ranking these geniuses strictly based off strength. Well, yes, strength is going to have a lot to do with where certain characters end up on this list. Some characters get strong because of their hard work and their training or their natural aptitude. And to me, these are qualities of a genius. However, some characters on this list get strong because of what's given to them. And while understanding immediately the abilities that are given to them and adapting them into their fighting style is also a sign of genius, I'm going to be giving more credit to people who have worked for the abilities that they've gained over the people that have been given abilities that they've then mastered. Because to me, that's a bigger sign of intellect and genius. Now, with that said, before we get into our top 10 here, I'd like to throw in some honorable mentions. Because I was kind of lying earlier when I said that only 10 people in the entire story are ever referred to as geniuses. The list is closer to like 15. But as we all know from experience here, a 15 entry list, well, that leads to a really long video that literally kills me, and it's Friday afternoon. So before we get into our top 10, let's get into our 3 honorable mentions. And our first honorable mention on our list of Naruto's greatest geniuses ranked is Sasori. Now, Sasori is referred to as a genius of the puppet technique by not only Granny Chiyo, his grandmother, but also by anybody from the Hidden Sand Village who fought alongside him, or anybody from other villages who had to fight against him. See, because it was in the Third Great Shinobi World War where Sasori gained the moniker of Sasori of the Red Sand, because of how many people he was able to cut down while they were trying to invade the Hidden Sand Village during the Third Great Shinobi World War. But what made Sasori such an incredible genius of the puppet technique? Well, first off, Sasori had the benefit of being born into the bloodline of Granny Chiyo, who previous to him hitting the peak of his strength was the greatest puppet user the Sand Village had ever seen, and he either had the misfortune of having his parents killed in either the Second or Third Great Shinobi World Wars, but probably the second. Now, because Sasori was orphaned by Sakamoto Hatake, he fell under the care of his grandmother, Granny Chiyo, who tried to redirect his grief into love of the puppet technique. However, because Sasori felt so alone in the world, he tried to find a way to make his puppets his friends, or even his parents, and thus he poured his heart and soul into the creation of his first couple of puppets, like the puppets he created that resembled his father and mother. However, after Sasori's best friend died after being stabbed by poison from the Hidden Sand Village, in order to make sure that Sasori wouldn't be stripped of another person in his life, he turned his best friend into a sort of living puppet, redefining puppet creation for the entirety of the Sand Village. See, because a puppet made from a person was able to retain the jutsu of that person, and thus Sasori became the first person to ever achieve this, achieving something either so unethical or so difficult to pull off that nobody in the Sand Village had even thought to try it previously. Yes, Granny Chiyo had been trying to find ways to give puppets real life, but nobody had ever thought to take the deceased and turn them into puppets. And thus Sasori would go on an onslaught of killing powerful people and then turning them into puppets, like he did with a third Kazekage, a person who previously to Gaara's rule as the fifth Kazekage was referred to as the strongest ever Kazekage. Pair this with the fact that Sasori was able to control more puppets simultaneously than any other puppet user in history, being able to control an absolutely ridiculous 3 300 puppets simultaneously, when his grandmother, who was previously dubbed as the greatest puppet user the Sand had ever seen, only controlled 12 at a time. Or 10? Is there 10 Shikamaru puppets, or is it 12? It's 10. I'm sorry. One for each finger. Duh. But Sasuke was able to control 30 times the amount of puppets as his grandmother, and while the overall quality of each individual puppet was less than that of the individual quality of the Shikamaru puppets, this is still a ridiculously daunting task that only a genius could pull off. And while that's not to say that Granny Chiyo probably couldn't control more than 10 puppets, she almost definitely could. Nobody, Granny Chiyo or Kankuro included, could ever come close to the 300 that Sasuke was able to control. And thus, when it comes to talks of geniuses of the puppet technique, you can't have that conversation without mentioning Sasuke's name. And thus, he is deserving of an honorable mention spot. But probably not as deserving as our next honorable mention spot, because our next honorable mention on our list of the greatest Naruto geniuses ranked, we have Tobirama.
Oh, Nick, what do you mean Tobirama's not even top 10? He created an Tensai, the Konoha police, the Chunin exams, everything!
And you're right, Tobirama did create 3 of the most powerful jutsu of all time and a lot of the long-standing structures that still exist within Konoha. He is the creator of Edo Tensai, the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and Flying Raijin. He was banging 10 toes against Mangekyo Sharingan users alongside Hashirama, and he, unlike Hashirama, got the job done against Izuna. He created the Konoha police, he created the Chunin exams, he created the Shinobi Academy. However, he is never technically explicitly referred to as a genius in the manga. Everybody else on this list is, including Sasuke. And I get it, listen, if I had to hand out genius awards, Tobirama would be top 3, maybe top 4. But I gotta play by the rules here, and as he's never explicitly referred to as a genius by the manga or the light novels, I can't make space for him on this list over other characters that have been referred to as a genius. Now listen, we've gotten close to calling him a genius. In chapter 621, when we were doing the flashback into Hashirama's backstory, Hashirama and Tobirama described that Tobirama was the man who created a lot of the jutsus that they know today, referring to Tobirama as the man who created countless jutsu and the man who developed Edo Tensai to its highest form, implying in some sense he was a genius inventor. When Hiruzen is battling against Tobirama in chapter 70, Hiruzen says Tobirama was always quick to pick up on the situation, remarking on his tactical genius. And in chapter 622, when talking about Tobirama, Hashirama says he was always extraordinary. Nobody ever calls him a genius. So unfortunately, while I can acknowledge his genius, he has to be an honorable mention. And our last honorable mention is a character that a lot of you probably don't even know was referred to as a genius in Naruto. Because our last honorable mention in our list, ranking every single one of the geniuses in Naruto, is Temari. Yeah, Temari is known as the genius of the Sand's wind users. And honestly, this makes sense. See, a lot of you understand that because Konoha is located in the Land of Fire, that a lot of the clans that originated in the Land of Fire, like the Sarutobi and the Uchiha, base the majority of their elemental releases around fire release. And this is consistent across the entirety of the Naruto map. Those from the Land of Lightning, or the village hidden in the clouds, use lightning release. Those from the Land of Water, or the hidden mist village, use water release, and those from the hidden sand village, which is located in the Land of Wind, use wind release. However, even amongst all of those wind release users, Temari is considered to be the greatest. Hailing from the Kazekage clan like Gaara and Kankuro, Temari comes from a powerful bloodline, a leader's bloodline. However, she didn't get magnet release. Rather, she got the nation's wind release. Wind release that she channels through her Tessin Jutsu, or her fan jutsu, with her gigantic iron fan. Yeah, the whole thing's iron. Now with this fan, Temari is able to make massive torrents of wind that she can use to devastate entire forests. She's able to glide on her fan to increase her mobility. And with this ridiculous level of wind release, she's not only shown feats like being able to kill a version 2 curse mark Tayuya with just one blast from her sickle weasel summoning, but was also shown to be able to blast back Monoro when he was reincarnated in the 4th Great Shinobi World War. With such power, mind you, that he decided that after being hit with Temari's wind release, he should use his Susanoo. And as Temari is probably the greatest wind style user we've ever seen from the Hidden Sand, she is rather deserving of this title. Now, is she the greatest wind user in all of Naruto? No, that's Naruto. And second place is probably either Orochimaru or Mitsuki, depending on who you want to talk, but there is a legitimate argument argument to be made that in terms of just wind release, she could bang with somebody like Orochimaru or Mitsuki. And being in the conversation with those two does mean that she must be a genius of some sort. So for that reason and that reason alone, Temari gets our last honorable mention spot. So with no further ado, let's get on to our list, which is actually now 12 entries because I remembered a couple of other people. I'm sorry, longer video. You probably won't complain. My voice will, but that's fine. I love you, and therefore the things I do for you feel as though they break my body sometimes, but I do them for you. Oh, Nick, if your voice hurts, why'd you add the 2? You could have just forgotten them and hoped nobody noticed. Everyone notices. They always notice. Anyways, let's get into our list. Starting with our number 12 spot. Coming in at number 12 on our list of ranking every single one of Naruto's greatest geniuses, we have Neji. Now, Neji is one of the first geniuses we're ever introduced to in the Naruto world. He's referred to as the greatest genin to come out of last year's class, is widely regarded as the hardest person to go up against in the Chunin exam arc. He displays his mastery over Gentle Fist in his battle against Hinata and Naruto, who is able to go toe-to-toe against even though Naruto is being influenced by the power of Kurama and is therefore accessing a level of power that basically nobody in Konoha was able to achieve up until that moment. And every single time we flash back into his backstory, we see that he is often referred to as the genius of the Hyuga. In fact, Hayashi Hyuga, Hinata's father and Neji's uncle, explicitly refers to Neji as the genius of the Hyuga. And anybody who's spent any amount of time around Neji, be it Rock Lee or Hinata, often refer to him as a genius. But why? Why is Neji such a once-in-a-generation genius? Why was he penned in as the next head of the Hyuga, even though he came from the side branch family? Well, it's not because he was born with the Byakugan. Everybody in the Hyuga is born with the Byakugan, and rather it was because of his mastery over the Gentle Fist. See, while yes, obviously, Neji was able to use the Byakugan better than a lot of the other Hyuga members, being able to see greater distances in one direction or in all 360 degrees, but more than anything, at a young age, Neji was able to master Gentle Fist techniques that he either was never supposed to learn or wasn't supposed to learn until he was much older. Things like the manga canon 8 trigrams 64 palms, or the anime canon 8 trigrams 128 palms, or maybe more importantly than either of those two things, things like rotation. See, rotation, while it has become a relatively common Byakugan ability, is not a technique that's known by basically any of the Hyuga members. Rotation is supposed to be a Gentle Fist technique that only the head of the main branch family and his heirs know. And therefore, Neji learning it at all was not only a massive breakaway from Hyuga tradition, but was also deemed especially impressive when you consider the fact that he wasn't explicitly taught it. In fact, Neji wasn't explicitly taught any of his Gentle Fist techniques, but simply by watching his uncle, the head of the Hyuga clan, fight, he was able to reverse engineer all of the techniques and master them perfectly, which led to Hayashi Hyuga coming to the realization that Neji was the genius of the Hyuga clan and one of the strongest Hyugas ever. And this is put on display during the Chunin exams, when Neji is able to go toe-to-toe with a Kurama-amped Naruto. A Kurama-amped Naruto that was able to catch the leg of a Haku, moving it near the speed of light. And yet Neji, just with his rotation, his Byakugan, and his Gentle Fist, was almost able to match Naruto's power. And thus, even though he lost in his battle against Naruto, he fully put on display what genius looked like, as Neji put up the best fight against Naruto that basically anybody in the Chunin exams would have been able to. Because Naruto, after this battle against Neji, goes on to fight and beat Gaara, and then goes on to fight a version 2 curse mark form of Sasuke, who Naruto could have beat if he wasn't holding back. So when it boils down to it, out of everybody who was present at the Chunin exams, Neji probably gave Naruto the best fight. Nick, what about Gaara? I'm saying gave Naruto his best fight, not Gamabunta. However, on account of the fact that pretty much after the Sasuke retrieval arc, Neji is forgotten as a character, while he is still consistently displayed as one of the stronger Hyuga members throughout the entirety of Naruto's story, he doesn't really progress all that much from part 1 of Naruto. And thus, as far as geniuses go, unfortunately, he's got to be put at the bottom of this list. But since we're talking about people who fought against a Kurama-amped Naruto, next up on our list at the number 11 spot, ranking all of Naruto's greatest geniuses, we have Haku. Yes, Haku is also referred to as a genius, and honestly, that's fair. Zabuza explicitly refers to Haku as a genius with special abilities. And while Ice Release in itself is a special ability, as the only people with Ice Release are the members of Haku's clan, and I guess, well, now Sasuke, even amongst Ice Release users, we've never seen anybody on par with Haku's ability. Now, this could either be because all of the Ice Release users were eradicated by ninja from the Hidden Mist, or forced into hiding, but I find it somewhat hard to believe that every single Ice Release user would be able to operate on the level of Haku. See, because Haku's demonic mirroring ice crystals, or Haku's mirror jutsu, was considered a flawless technique by Zabuza, one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist, who literally made a career out of killing high-level ninja. And not only did Zabuza make a career out of killing high-level ninja, but Zabuza believed that Haku could not be defeated, regardless of who he went up against. And this isn't a ridiculous assumption by Zabuza. See, if it weren't for Haku for like half the fight against Naruto and Sasuke not wanting to kill them, both Naruto and Sasuke would have died in Haku's Ice Mirror Maze. See, because not only was Naruto, or the newly awakened Sharingan using Sasuke, able to keep up with Haku's movements, but traditional ninjutsus that would have advantage against something like Ice Release, like Fire Release, could not melt away Haku's mirrors. On top of that, his ice mirrors were shown to have a level of durability that could withstand multiple explosive seals simultaneously. And thus, once you end up in Haku's dome, that's probably going to be the last place you ever go. Now, it's obviously not until Naruto's able to tap into the power of Kurama and catch Haku by the leg that the tide shift over to Naruto and Sasuke's sides. But like we just said, when Naruto taps into the power of Kurama, he becomes an almost light speed opponent with city level AP. For the early days of Naruto, this was legitimately unheard of. Tie all this into Haku's ridiculous intellect and ridiculous shuriken jutsu ability that allowed for Haku to strike individual pressure points with Senbon from a distance to make somebody seem as though they were dead. And yeah, there was no reason for Zabuza to refer to Haku as anything but a genius. However, on account of the fact that Haku was kind of the first genius we're ever introduced to, and unfortunately dies in the same arc they're introduced in, they don't really have a whole lot of time to show us everything that they're truly capable of. And while Haku does come back in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, we don't get to see a whole lot from him. So is Haku a genius in Naruto? Yeah, 100%. But is he the genius we probably know the least about? Also, yeah, 100%. So because of that, he gets our number 11 spot. But speaking of geniuses we don't know a whole lot about, coming up at number 10 in our list of Naruto's greatest geniuses ranked and explained, we have Shisui.
Oh, Nick, that's way too low for the greatest genjutsu user in all of Naruto.
No, it's not. Yes, Shisui is absolutely a genius. And I'm actually including him on this list even though he is technically never referred to as a genius in the manga. Yeah, isn't that nuts? When I ask you, list the geniuses from the Naruto universe, Shisui's probably like top 3 on your list, right? Never referred to as a genius. He's called Shisui the Body Flicker. He's known as one of the strongest Uchiha of his era. He's called exceptionally skilled, and even the Uchiha's strongest genjutsu user, but he is never once referred to as a genius. It is one of the biggest misconceptions in the Naruto fandom. That's because a lot of Shisui and Itachi stories are told simultaneously. And therefore, because of how often Itachi is referred to as a genius, everybody assumes that Shisui is also referred to as a genius, but he isn't. But I'd be foolish to not put him on the list. See, even ignoring the fact that Shisui was the wielder of the Kodomatsukame, which many believe is the strongest genjutsu in all of Naruto, it's not. The real reason I would be remiss to not include Shisui on this list is because he kind of fits the description of a genius in Naruto perfectly. He's literally the youngest ever person to ever awaken a Mangekyo Sharingan at just 7 years old. A lot of Uchiha don't even awaken their Sharingan by 7 years old. But Shisui, who was fighting in the 3rd Great Shinobi World War, left his best friend and squad mate behind to die because he was jealous of the fact that he was stronger than him. And the guilt of Shisui believing that he was involved in his best friend's death caused a Mangekyo Sharingan awakening in him, giving him access to the Kodomatsukame at just 7 years old. Ties into the fact that alongside Itachi, we learned from the light novels and some of the anime episodes that Shisui was one of the youngest ever members in the Anbu, who was carrying out ridiculously high-level missions like battling against Mukai Kohinata, who was able to kill by placing him under Genjutsu even though he had a ridiculously high Genjutsu resistance. And yeah, basically all of the information we've ever learned about Shisui points in the direction of him being a genius. But Nick, why does this apply to Shisui and not Tobirama? Well, we don't know what age Tobirama was when he made all of the jutsus that he did. We know he used Flying Raijin Slash against Izuna Uchiha, which allowed for him to kill Izuna Uchiha, but he could have been like 18 there. I'm more so focused on the fact that Shisui, like a lot of the other geniuses on this list, was able to accomplish something as a child that a lot of people think that children shouldn't be able to accomplish, which is kind of what the definition of a genius in the Naruto universe is. And thus, for that reason, Shisui makes a list, even though Tobirama doesn't. But I can't put him that high, considering the fact that he is never explicitly labeled as a genius. But you know who is labeled as a genius? Our number 9 entry, because coming up at number 9 on our list, ranking every single one of the geniuses in Naruto, we have Gaara. Now, this one shouldn't be that surprising to a lot of you, because like Gaara is absolutely a genius, a lot of you probably don't remember when he is referred to as a genius. And it's actually during the Chunin exams, when Baki, the guy who wears a cloth over one half of his face, refers to Gaara as a genius made for combat. Now, this makes sense when you consider the fact that Gaara was specifically engineered by Rasa to be the Sand Village's greatest weapon, which is why he had Shukaku sealed in him before he was actually even born. Something that would eventually obviously lead to the death of Gaara's mother in childbirth, and kind of lead into Gaara spiraling into the head case that he was in the early parts of Naruto. But even though Gaara was an ultra-violent sociopathic head case in part 1 of Naruto, he was still undoubtedly a genius. See, ignoring for a second that Gaara had access to sand that had his mother's soul living in it that naturally defended him without his own input, because that's not really genius, that's kind of out of his control, Gaara has rather consistently shown to have access to one of the highest chakra levels in all of Naruto, being able to maintain things like sand armor over the course of entire fights, when sand armor is said to be incredibly taxing chakra-wise, covering entire battlefields in sand and using sand burial and all of it to try and kill people like Shikamaru, who, by the way, not on this list, never referred to as a genius, also just kind of dumb in general, or even going so far as to cover the entirety of the hidden sand village in a sand veil to protect it from a C2 bomb from Deidara. Gaara has consistently some of the most impressive chakra feats we've ever seen in Naruto. Don't even get me started on his Fuinjutsu. The man literally makes pyramids out of sand and then uses magnet release curse marks on them to enforce their sealing ability. He stopped one of Madora's meteors. But more than that, Gaara's ability to tap into the sand control aspect of Shukaku is kind of crazy. When Kakashi sees it for the first time, he calls it an unusual jutsu, and that's because it is an unusual jutsu. See, it's not magnet release that allows for Gaara to control sand. Sand is not magnetic. Gold is magnetic. Iron is magnetic. That's why the third Kazekage and Rasa, Gaara's father, are able to use gold and iron sand, but sand is not magnetic. The only reason that Gaara is able to control sand is because his connection to Shukaku. Rather, Gaara's magnet release that he is using at all times allows for him to increase the density of his sand by weaving his chakra into it, a technique he got from his father that he doesn't like using because he doesn't like his father. And yet Gaara, even though he basically had no connection to Shukaku whatsoever, was able to figure out how to use his sand in pretty much any way imaginable. Defensively, offensively, to turn into a third eye that he can fly around and use to scout, to fly, to seal, to squish. Whatever can be done with sand, Gaara has figured out how to do. And therefore, when Baki called him a genius born for battle, I don't think he was wrong. However, unfortunately, ever really since part 1 of Naruto, Gaara hasn't shown a huge amount of progress in terms of what he can do with his sand. Yes, obviously, by the time that the 4th Great Shinobi World War comes around, we see that Gaara has access to ridiculously high-level Fuinjutsu, but this Fuinjutsu is basically the only update that we get in terms of Gaara's strength in part 2, and thus for that reason, he gets our number 9 spot. But speaking of Gaara, we might as well talk about his in-laws, because coming up at number 8 on our list, ranking every single one of the greatest geniuses from Naruto, we have Shikamaru. Now, Shikamaru is the most literal representation of a genius we have on this list. While a genius in Naruto usually refers to a kid who's better at doing adult things than the adults, Shikamaru is referred to as a genius because he's smart. And therefore, when talking about geniuses, Shikamaru is often referred to as not a battle genius, but a real-life genius. And this point is established by Asuma, who refers to him as a genius, saying exactly he's a genius. His IQ is over 200, and thus Shikamaru, early on in the story, is established as one of the most intellectually impressive characters in all of Naruto, following closely in the footsteps of his father, Shikaku, who also has an IQ over 200, and is so incredibly smart that he's literally put in charge of game planning the war effort for the Shinobi Alliance, a role that Shikamaru has to take over after Shikaku is bombed by the Ten Tails alongside Inochi, Ino's father. And yeah, Shikamaru often displays his ridiculous intellect, whether it was his battle against Kin in the preliminary matches of the Chunin exams where he makes her bash her head against the wall, knocking her out and winning him the match, or his battle against Temari where he uses Naruto's uppercut hold to extend his shadow all the way to Temari's location, overcoming the advantage of battling against a long-range type jutsu user, or even in part 2 where in order to avenge Asuma's death, Shikamaru tricks Hidan into believing that he's cut him on the face but instead replaces his blood with that of Kakuzu's, causing for Hidan to actually destroy one of Kakuzu's hearts, and then leading Hidan into a trap using his Shadow Paralysis Jutsu that allows for him to once and for all negate Hidan's ridiculous healing factor. Time and time again, every opportunity that Shikamaru's ever had, he displays his over 200 IQ to its fullest. However, if we're being entirely real with ourselves, in terms of battle intellect, if Shikamaru doesn't get a couple of minutes, if not a couple of days, to think about what needs to be done in battle, his intellect's actually not all that impressive. Multiple people some of which that are on this list already, display what I would call a greater intellect and a greater ability to think on their feet. So yeah, Shikamaru is kind of like Batman, where if you give him enough prep time, you could defeat God in a fight. Without prep time, his intelligence can leave a bit to be desired. And therefore, while he does probably fit the best definition of genius we have out of all of the characters on this list, I can't put him all that high, and thus, he gets the number 8 spot. One spot below the person who probably least fits our definition of a genius on this list, because coming up at number 7 on our list ranking the greatest geniuses in all of Naruto, we got Rock Lee. Yeah, Rock Lee, not super smart. Also, probably the last person that you would think of when you think of the geniuses of Naruto. Because our definition of a genius in Naruto was a child who was better at adult things than an adult. And Rock Lee can't use ninjutsu or genjutsu. However, my guy refers to Lee as a genius of hard work. And like it or not, this is Lee being referred to as a genius. Now, as to what this says for the argument that Rock Lee is one of the only people in Naruto that actually fits the definition of hard work overcoming talent, I'm not going to get into right now. But why is Rock Lee called a genius of hard work? Well, because he commits himself to more hard work than anybody else. See, while people like Naruto, yes, spin air inside of a balloon and spin water inside of a balloon and then spin air inside of a rubber ball until their fingers bleed, that's just a regular Tuesday for Rock Lee. Yes, there's tons of people that work ridiculously hard inside of Naruto. However, Rock Lee works harder than all of them, and that's because the starting line for Rock Lee is way behind everybody else's. Rock Lee makes up for the massive disparity between his strength and everybody else's by outworking everybody else. And thus, when my guy is calling him a genius of hard work, he's saying that Rock Lee's commitment to outwork everybody else is a form of genius in itself, in that nobody else would be willing to push themselves as hard, as often as Rock Lee. And that in itself is a form of genius. People who are able to push themselves to the top of their craft, even if their craft is simple, require a will and a drive that many could consider genius. And thus, while 99.99999% of people wouldn't even sniff at the idea of doing 500 laps around Konoha on their hands, Rock Lee sees it as an opportunity to get stronger and doesn't falter in the face of this ridiculous challenge. And thus, Rock Lee is able to accomplish things that even adults wouldn't be able to accomplish, like mastering the 8 gates or strapping thousands of pounds of weights to his leg and trying to battle against others while being hindered by this training. And this is why during the preliminary matches, Mike Guy refers to Rock Lee as the forefront user of taijutsu in the Leaf. So even if you didn't want to talk about Rock Lee as a genius of hard work, you could also talk about him as a genius of taijutsu. But here's the thing, talking about him as a genius of taijutsu would kind of be disingenuous, because he's not a genius. Neji is a genius of taijutsu. Rock Lee isn't, because Rock Lee wasn't born with these abilities or a natural aptitude for them. He has to work twice as hard for every single step that other people get. And quite honestly, that's the opposite of genius. But because he's able to take those 2 steps for everybody else's 1, that in itself can be called a form of genius. And because Rock Lee's genius is so much harder to achieve than everybody else's, I have to put him pretty high up on the list of Naruto's true geniuses. But unfortunately, on account of the fact that I believe him being labeled as a genius is kind of disingenuous to his character arc, I can't put him that crazy high on the list. And definitely not higher than our number 6 spot, because coming up at number 6 on our list ranking all of Naruto's greatest geniuses, we have Kabuto. See, when I put Kabuto on this list, what a lot of you probably think of is Kabuto the inventor. The same Kabuto who's able to go to Ryuchi Cave, become a dragon sage, and reverse engineer every single scientific achievement Orochimaru had ever accomplished and apply them to himself. However, that's not the context with which Kabuto is referred to as a genius, because Kabuto is actually referred to a genius long before any of that. See, Kabuto is referred to as a genius in part 1 of Naruto by Orochimaru, who calls him a medical jutsu genius. And honestly, Kabuto is deserving of this title. See, not only is Kabuto pretty much the best understudy that Orochimaru could ask for, but also Kabuto is pretty much responsible for keeping people like Kimimaru alive, even though his body's being ravaged by a chakra disease. And Kabuto is displayed during the Search for Tsunade arc as such a competent medical ninjutsu user that he's able to go toe-to-toe with Tsunade in one-on-one combat, being able to use his medical ninjutsu ninjutsu and chakra scalpels to cut down Shizune, and being able to use his control over his own chakra control to figure out how to control his body perfectly after Tsunade remaps all of the controls of his nervous system with what is, I believe, one of the most underrated jutsus in all of Naruto. A lightning release jutsu that simply requires contact from Tsunade to jumble your entire nervous system. It's ridiculously broken and she never uses it again. Probably because it doesn't work against Kabuto, but still, time and time again, Kabuto establishes himself as a medical ninjutsu genius. The only kind of person who could graft on Orochimaru's cells onto their body in order to reverse engineer every single jutsu that Orochimaru has ever come into contact with. The kind of person who was able to bring Sasuke back to life by fusing his cells with Sasuke's heart. When it boils down to it, there was really nothing that Orochimaru did that Kabuto couldn't figure out. And considering the fact that Orochimaru is one of the greatest geniuses in all of Naruto, even if Kabuto was just largely following in their footsteps, being able to follow in those footsteps is an impressive feat in itself. But he was still following in Orochimaru's footsteps, which is why he's at number 6, and why at number 5 on our list ranking all of the greatest geniuses in Naruto, we have Orochimaru. Now, listen, after Orochimaru being able to basically become Orochimaru and replace them is impressive, but there's a difference between becoming Orochimaru and just being Orochimaru. And here's the thing, Orochimaru was always Orochimaru. An orphan that was brought under the wing of Hiruzen Sarutobi, Hiruzen immediately realized that Orochimaru was a genius. However, a genius with a sinister air around him. See, from the early jump, Hiruzen realized that Orochimaru was special. Orochimaru, like Sasuke in Naruto's era of Team 7, stood out amongst his genin teammates, never struggling to accomplish any of the tasks assigned to them. However, unfortunately, that genius and that curiosity skewed in the wrong direction for Orochimaru, as after the death of Tsunade's little brother, a genin that was under the care of Orochimaru, Orochimaru became curious about the concept of immortality, and thus Orochimaru began to engage in scientific experiments to try and unlock immortality, because immortality was just a stepping stone that would allow for Orochimaru one day, if it was ever achieved, to live long enough to crack the code behind every single mystery there is on Earth. And in order to crack the code on all of those mysteries, Orochimaru sometimes needs to bring things lost to the past back to life, like wood release, a jutsu that for all intents and purposes was long gone until Orochimaru dug it back up. And while the morality of Orochimaru's experiments left, well, a lot to be desired, Orochimaru, with the creation of the curse mark that they were able to reverse engineer from Jugo's clan, not only allowed for Orochimaru to place a little bit of their chakra and DNA in every single person they placed it on, but also give every single person that it was placed on access to Orochimaru's Senjutsu chakra, which slowly but surely molded every single person who tapped into this Senjutsu chakra to Orochimaru's will. And it's been revealed with time that the curse mark was kind of an upgraded and preliminary version to the karma market. Not to mention the fact that Orochimaru was also able to organically figure out how to clone themselves, casually figured out how to pull off immortality by swapping bodies, and has now accomplished immortality after swapping into a white Zetsu body, which has no will and lives forever. Basically everything that Orochimaru has ever set out to do, they've accomplished, whose only real competition is other scientific geniuses like Amado. So for that reason, Orochimaru gets our number 5 spot. But was Orochimaru an Anbu captain at 13 years old? No, which is why coming in at number 4 on our list ranking the greatest geniuses in all of Naruto, we have Itachi. Now, Itachi kind of is the golden boy of child geniuses in Naruto. Well, one of them, I guess. See, because, well, yes, obviously Itachi was able to become the youngest ever Anbu captain, becoming an Anbu captain at the age of 13. Itachi was also the previous holder of the fastest ever completion of the Forest of Death before Gaara took the test. However, the big difference between Itachi and Gaara is that Itachi took the test by himself. Yeah, Itachi flew through the Chunin exams by himself, not on a team of 3. And he did it when he was 10. Yeah, not 7, 10. At 7, he became a genin. At 10, he became a chunin. At 11, he joined the Anbu. And at 13, he became an Anbu captain. It was also when he was 13 years old that he was able to slaughter the entirety of the Uchiha clan. And, well, yes, Obito helped. Obito only killed the non-combatants, the women and the children. Itachi, as a 13-year-old, went toe-to-toe with the entirety of the fighting force of the Uchiha clan and won. He woke his Monkey Kyo Sharingan at 13 years old after finishing off Shisui, and just a few years after massacring his entire clan, when Orochimaru Shikamaru tried to steal his body, he was so much more powerful than Orochimaru that he almost stole Orochimaru's body. He then, at the legitimate end of his life and end of his chakra reserves, was still so much more powerful than the strongest ever version of Orochimaru we had seen up until that moment, the 8-headed white snake version of Orochimaru that he was able to stab Orochimaru through the chest with the Totsuka blade and seal him all but temporarily into the realm of drunken dreams. He is the only ever canonical person to kill somebody with genjutsu. Genjutsu that, mind you, he had never used before. He was able to kill a Jonin on the battlefield of the Third Great Shinobi World War when he was 4 years old. And when he was reincarnated, he went 2-0 in his 2 battles against Nagato and Kabuto. Genius hardly even begins to explain it when talking about Itachi, which is why people like Fugaku, his father, said that he is a genius beyond compare, with multiple different clan members of the Uchiha claiming him to be the genius of the Uchiha. But is he a more gifted genius than our number 3 spot? I wouldn't say so, because coming up at number 3 on our list, ranking all of the greatest geniuses in Naruto, we have Minato. Listen, who wins in a fight between Minato and Itachi is one of the oldest fought about topics in the Naruto community. And that's because when talking about the 2 golden boy geniuses of Konoha, Minato and Itachi are usually talked about as the 2 greatest in history. And thus me putting them at spots 3 and 4 might be a little triggering to some of you, and I understand why. I mean, after all, Minato has the highest ever score of the exit exam of the Shinobi Academy. He is the creator of the Rasengan that he created to fight against Kurama inside of the love of his life, Kushina, at the ripe age of somewhere between 12 and 14 years old, probably closer to 14. Minato was fighting against full-blown perfect Jinchuriki in the Second Great Shinobi World War, where he was so incredibly powerful that people like Jiraiya were relying on him to get him out of hairy situations using his flying Raijin, which he also taught to himself and is the only person in the history of Naruto to teach to themselves until Boruto came around. Oh, Nick, what about the Hokage's guard? That's a different version of flying Raijin, and they need 3 people to pull it off. Minato is the only ninja in the history of Naruto to ever get a real run-on-site order. He was one of the most instrumental forces in Konoha's victory during the Third Great Shinobi World War, where he was able to kill 50 stone shinobi by himself in just 1 battle, mind you. He, on the night of Naruto's birth, was not only able to seal half of Kurama inside of Naruto using the 8 trigram seal, a technique he learned from Kushina, but was also able to immediately after that use another Uzumaki Fuin Jutsu, the Reaper Death Seal, to seal away the other half of Kurama inside of himself. Not to mention, he was a perfect Toad Sage, and then after sealing half of Kurama inside of himself, when he was brought back during the Fourth Great Shinobi World War with Edo Tensei, he's able to immediately master a KCM2 mode, something that took Naruto years to even begin to crack. And he was so incredibly intelligent that while fighting against Obito and his ridiculously broken Kamui ability, he was able to deduce not only how it works, but also its exact weakness, allowing for him to win flat out in a battle against Obito, something that very few people would ever be able to do, displaying a level of thinking on your feet genius that's basically top 1 or 2 in the universe. And it's this kind of genius that makes it so easy to understand why he would be referred to as something like a once-in-a-generation type of genius, or a gifted genius even amongst the Hokage. Minato is different, and that's why he deserves our number 3 spot, because time and time again he displayed his ability to master new and unique jutsus at levels that other people couldn't even dream of. Whether that's being a Toad Sage or instantly mastering a KCM2 form, this is the kind of stuff that only a top 1, top 2, top 3 genius in the universe would be able to pull off. But then why is he number 3 on this list? Well, because coming up at number 2, we have Minato's student. Because coming up at number 2 on our list, ranking the greatest geniuses in all of Naruto, we have Kakashi. Yes, I have Kakashi higher than his sensei Minato, and higher than Itachi, but why? Well, ignoring for a fact that Kakashi, like Minato and Itachi, was referred to as a genius throughout the entirety of his childhood, with us being shown during the flashbacks of the Third Great Shinobi World War, Kakashi being referenced as the genius of the Sharingan, and Mike Guy referring to Kakashi as a genius multiple times over the course of Naruto. Honestly, comparatively, as a childhood genius, Kakashi is less impressive than both Minato and Itachi. And Kakashi would admit that. Kakashi is older than Itachi, by just a couple of years, but still older than Itachi. And yet Kakashi understood basically every single time he was ever around Itachi that Itachi was stronger than him. Whether that was while they served on the Anbu together, or when they came face to face with each other as enemies, Kakashi understood that in a battle against Itachi, he was greatly outmatched. On top of this, Kakashi knew perfectly just how ridiculously powerful Minato was, and understood that there was a fair chance that he would never be able to achieve the level of strength that Minato held on to. However, it's worth noting that Kakashi has gone through a lot of things that neither Minato or Itachi ever had to go through. See, Kakashi was considered considered a genius long before Sharingan was placed in his face. But after Sharingan was placed in Kakashi's face, he showed why he was truly a genius. See, well, yes, after Kakashi got the Sharingan, all the other Sharingan users just so happened to disappear. No idea what happened to that. Kakashi was still able to master the Sharingan almost immediately. Whether it was using the extrasensory perception of the Sharingan to counteract the tunnel vision of his Chidori, or copying thousands of jutsu, or even going so far as to awaken his Mangekyo Sharingan and master Kamui, Kakashi was able to master something he never should have been able to, the Sharingan. But it doesn't end there with Kakashi. Because, well, yes, it's ludicrous that he's able to master a Sharingan, awaken new Tomei, and eventually awaken a Mangekyo Sharingan with a Mangekyo Sharingan ability that should be objectively very difficult to use. Not only does Kakashi use this Sharingan to use hundreds, if not thousands of jutsu over the course of his time as a shinobi, but he also, when given the opportunity to unlock Dual Mangekyo Sharingan, or DMS, immediately figures it out, gaining a 6-pass upgrade from Obito, and not only gives him a perfect winged Susanoo, but also applies his Mangekyo Sharingan ability of Kamui to the entire Susanoo. And thus, not only is Kakashi able to use probably one of the strongest Susanoo we've ever seen, but he's also able to apply Kamui to things like his Chidori. And thus, in every opportunity Kakashi's ever have, he's mastered the techniques and jutsus that are handed to him. And that, to me, speaks to a ridiculously high level of genius, higher than that of either Minato or Itachi. But unfortunately, even Kakashi pales in comparison to our #1 spot, because coming up at #1 in our list of ranking all the greatest geniuses in Naruto is Sasuke. Yeah, Sasuke probably gets referred to as a genius more than literally anybody else in the story. Ruka says he's a genius, Orochimaru says he's a genius, Naruto says he's a genius, Kakashi says he's a genius. Everybody who meets Sasuke says that he's a genius, probably because he's a genius. I mean, his father was the head of the Uchiha clan. His brother was a once-in-a-lifetime genius. He awoke his Mangekyo Sharingan at 16 after killing his brother. His Mangekyo Sharingan gave him access to Amaterasu and Kankatsuchi. That he was able to master all but immediately to be able to kill Danzo, who had access to Izanagi like 17 times in Hashirama cells. And sure, Danzo had a lifetime of experience and was one of the most decorated shinobi in the history of Konoha. And sure, he was able to battle against all 5 of the Kage simultaneously. And while it didn't go all that well for him, he was able to force the 4th Raikage A to cut off his own arm. And yeah, he was able to figure out the curse mark pretty much immediately and use it basically immediately after literally dying in a barrel. And yeah, he was able to master the Chidori and Rock Lee's high-speed taijutsu in 2 weeks of training to get ready for his battle against Gaara. And sure, he was able to figure out MS and EMS to figure out his Susanoo and his perfect Susanoo all but immediately. And he figured out how to put a Susanoo on Kurama to make a majestic entire Susanoo without ever previously training. And sure, he was able to blend his Kankatsuchi with Naruto's wind-style Rasen Shuriken to make a blaze-style Rasen Shuriken that leveled an entire battlefield. He was able to cut Jubidara in half. He was able to figure out the 6th Tomei Rinnegan immediately. So much so that he was able to use the Genjutsu of the 6th Tomei Rinnegan to put Sakura under Genjutsu, knocking her out, when she at that moment in time was effectively immune to Genjutsu. And yeah, he used Chibaku Tensei on all 9 of the tailed beasts simultaneously and became a pseudo 10-tailed Jinchuriki, unlocking an upgrade for his perfect Susanoo and Indra's Arrow that we've literally never seen before because, well, nobody could ever do it again. But whatever. It was all given to him. It was all, he didn't even kill, Itachi killed himself. I mean, yeah, he immediately deduced that in order to counteract Deidara's microscopic, explosive clay little selves that were floating through his bloodstream, that he needed to electrocute himself, something that very, 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 very few people in the Naruto universe would have been able to figure out quick enough. And he was able to master Kirin, which is the jutsu that literally uses lightning so it can't be absorbed, and he has to literally change different climates in order to pull lightning out of thundercloud. And it almost killed Itachi preemptively, and if he hadn't gotten his Susanoo off, he probably would have died. Well, like, so yeah, the number, he's it. He's the best genius. And no, Madara and Hashirama are on the list. Neither of them are ever referred to as geniuses. I know, it's weird, right? But I don't make the rules. Fuck it. If you agree with the list, tell me in the comments below. It's 5 p.m. on Friday. I'm having 8 to 9 beers. I'm not gonna have 8 to 9 beers. I'm alone tonight. I'm gonna play 8 to 9 hours of Arc Raiders or Battlefield 6. Whatever. I didn't want to put Sasuke at 1.